Hi, I'm Charlotte Fawkes-Rees, Retail and Consumer Insight Analyst at AHDB. I was responsible for the running of our next instalment of our Rethinking Retail Research series, focusing on butchers and supermarket meat counters. In this video, I'm going to give you an overview of the research project as well as its key findings. So let's start off with some background and what we already know about the meat counter, and actually why AHDB thought that this was an important area of red meat retail to research. Currently, loose packaged meat and poultry accounts for 7% of the total market. Now, that's equivalent to almost 183 million kilos. Supermarkets account for 55% of loose meat and poultry sales, butchers for 32%, and the rest go through other retail outlets. While 7% of sales may seem relatively small, it is actually a really important part of our meat and poultry sales. From research, we know that consumers like interacting with the meat counter. And when we investigated further into why this is, counters mean that consumers can see meat clearly without packaging obscuring the cuts. And that's important to 3/4 of consumers. They like that they can have more control over the weights which they're getting and actually therefore the price that they're paying, which is important to 2/3 of consumers. There's also the perception that meat is more likely to be locally sourced and of a higher quality than that found on the aisle. We also know that for more than half of consumers, they actually have a stronger connection to their food when they purchase it from a counter compared with the aisle. And all of this is really encouraging that there is demand from consumers for the option to purchase their meat from a butcher or supermarket meat counter. Despite this, loose packaged meat and poultry is actually underperforming compared with the total market and has seen a 3.2% decline year on year compared with a 0.7% growth for the total meat market. For butchers, this decline is actually even steeper at 6.8% reduction year on year. Now, if we look into some of the barriers to purchasing meat from a counter, convenience, cost and confidence are some of the key obstacles. Almost 3/4 feel that it is inconvenient to purchase meat from a counter, and at a time when costs have been increasingly important to shoppers, the perception that it is more cost effective to purchase meat pre-packaged from an aisle is apparent for 62%. Research has also shown that almost half of shoppers rely on packaging to know how to cook their meat, all of which will have contributed to the drop in volumes being purchased in a loose format. So after consulting with industry, it was determined that actually understanding how to re-engage consumers with meat counters with the aim to grow and protect sales was really a key area for this research to focus on. To do this, we wanted to know what types of messages were going to have the greatest impact on shopper purchase intent, as well as the format that these messages should take. Now, in general, we found that the insights between butchers and supermarket counters were actually very consistent. So we've gone with the overall results for this presentation. But please do contact the team if you're interested in details for specific consumers or retailer types. To do this, we used an online questionnaire of 1,204 respondents. The questionnaire was broadly split into 3 sections. Section 1, using a max diff to test the kinds of messages consumers liked best. We tested 30 messages ranging from inspiration, health, environment, sustainability, and farming and provenance, and to then rank them in order of preference. Once we had this ranking, we used TURF analysis, so that's total unduplicated reach and frequency, a statistical research technique that gauges the appeal and reach within a market for the best combination of messages. This helps to maximise the number of consumers you can actually connect to with the fewest number of messages. Next, we investigated how different point of sale assets are received by format through in situ testing. Then finally, a secondary max diff was used to understand what aesthetics best appealed to consumers. We tested 30 different colour palettes and imagery types to best understand what a consumer likes to look at when thinking about purchasing meat. And by combining these three stages, this approach has allowed us to understand the messages, formats and aesthetics which could be used to increase purchase intent at meat counters. So let's start off with the findings, and this is what the research found the ideal counter could look like. We found that there should be a hierarchy of messages developed, which use specific formats to best increase purchase intent. This starts from afar and away from that counter, next on the approach to the counter, and then finally when at the counter to get best impact. So if we start from afar, and that would be focusing on these larger assets. Inspirational messages were the strongest type of message and took the top 4 spots in the Mastiff. These results are in line with those which we've seen in our previous Rethinking retail research, with inspiration the dominant theme preferred by consumers. The top 2 inspiration messages were quite similar, providing guidance on how to prepare and cook meat perfectly, and having info and guidance on the use of different cuts. This may be due to almost half of consumers claiming to rely on packaging for knowing how to prepare meats. Now, this is something which is obviously missing from loose packaged meats. Therefore, consider messages providing guidance about cooking cuts perfectly, ideal cooking times, and how to best use different cuts is key. For the third message, and that was guidance around how to make meals go further, consumers are always looking for an offer or a deal. So in a sense, one larger cut of meat, which could then be turned into 2 meals, is going to appear to be better value as it's seen as that extra free meal. Now, something known as the zero price bias, we value something more when it is free over very cheap, is going to definitely be playing on consumers' minds here. But it isn't just about what consumers can make with their purchases, which is important for driving that meat purchase intent. When we look at what factors are classed as very or extremely important when purchasing red meat, taste, freshness and quality are the top 3 reasons. So ensuring that this is highlighted around counters could really help drive purchase intent. Now this could be with wording or with images. The research also indicated that aesthetics are important too. So from the 30 different mood boards we tested, the top 5 were all broadly similar in that they showcased meat being cooked and prepared with warming colours such as browns, reds and yellows. The bottom 5 were also broadly similar, so showing those cooler colours such as blues and silvers with more abstract imagery of the meats. And actually this was found to be off-putting, particularly with images of utensils and lack of cooked meat being on show, very much being less likely to be preferred. So why do consumers prefer that meat being cooked? Well, this is linked back to that inspiration that they're looking for. They prefer to be able to see the art of what is possible, especially considering when they're already noticing that the meat in the butcher's counter in its raw format. People also like to be able to disassociate meat from their animal origins, so making sure that meat and animal becomes very separate categories. For the colour palettes, certain colours such as reds and yellows are known to stimulate appetite as well as attract attention, and they can really evoke those feelings of warmth, vitality and luxury or indulgence. When we think about blues and silvers, those are more likely to perhaps be linked with fish when you're thinking about the kitchen colour palettes, and also feeling a little bit cooler and not quite so inviting. When asked to click on parts of the in situ testing imagery, the larger the asset, we found that consumers were more likely to be drawn to it. So this would then lean towards using these larger touch points to be the most eye-catching and appealing to encourage consumers to go towards the counter. And with these formats, inspiration would be a really strong way to do this. It might be tempting to think that just focusing on inspiration is the right way to go, as it is clearly preferred by most consumers. But it is important to not overlook the other types of messages and focus solely on inspiration, because you will be excluding other preferences. The turf analysis, so the total unduplicated reach and frequency, found that combining a mix of inspiration, health, and farming provenance messages had the greater cumulative effect and reach compared with using any one type in isolation. This is when other formats, aside from those larger attention-grabbing assets, can really be utilised to provide these messages. So we've looked at how to attract attention to the counter from afar. We're now going to focus on when the shopper is approaching the counter, and specifically focus on the importance and impact of leaflets and recipe cards. Now, I showed you a couple of slides ago this infographic about the assets which attract the most attention. So those larger assets doing a significantly better job at this. But attention doesn't necessarily translate into sales. So if we look at likelihood to purchase for each of these assets, we can actually see that size has less of an impact on this. And the smaller assets, such as leaflets and recipe cards, work just as hard in this area. When we look at consumer preference for the different assets, posters are the most preferred, with leaflets in second place. If we look into the reasons why these over-index with consumers, the poster was the most popular option due to its visual appeal. This, in combination with an inspiration message and its consistency with the mood board, means it's the ideal combination. However, we see that for a leaflet, this can actually work harder at showing a wider range of themes for messages. It outperforms all other assets for showing British messages, for being seen as a source of information, and also some do look for that ethical and welfare messaging to show through. And all these reputational factors are known to be important to consumers and increase in importance when price is less of a dominating factor. Following the in situ test, each respondent was assigned a touch point to review. The recipe card was found to over-index with word associations for being modern, exciting and inspirational. Meanwhile, the leaflet was seen as essential. When asked what messages consumers would expect to see on these formats, inspiration was a key factor for recipe cards. So getting really tasty red meat meals on here is key, while leaflets can actually work that little bit harder, with consumers expecting to see farming and provenance stories as well as health messages present. When we look specifically at the key messages for these leaflet formats, Britishness, which in the eyes of consumers can also be somewhat interchangeable with localness, and sourcing claims, which can be made, came through as top, followed by tangible health benefits, particularly around how red meat is naturally high in vitamin B12, which helps the body release energy from food, or information about how red meat is naturally rich in high quality protein were very much preferred by consumers. Next, consumers want to see some reference to welfare schemes that have been adopted. And then finally, some expectation for environmental claims which can be made here. This could be from what British farmers are doing to look after the countryside, insight into grazing practices, through to how British beef, lamb and pork has lower carbon emissions than other countries, as well as being some of the most sustainable in the world. So while recipe cards and leaflets might not grab the same attention as a poster, they are still really important with consumers. Finally, within the hierarchy, we have when the consumer is at the counter, and specifically looking at meat flags. We found in the research that while flags are the smallest format which can be used for influencing the consumer, they're actually the second most important format for doing this. And 56% of consumers are extremely or very likely to purchase something from the counter if flags are displayed. So an extremely hard-working asset. We asked what respondents would expect to see on flags, and the broad range of messaging topics came out. 88% want inspiration in the form of how to prepare and cook the meat. 86% expect to see British and local sourcing information. 85% expect to see some reference to health messages, and 3/4 expect quality messaging. While this seems like shoppers are looking for lots of information, this could be in the format of images, keywords, or logos, and in combination with previous assets, getting the message and presence of meat flags right can really help to increase that purchase intent. But we have to remember we haven't spoken about a massively important part of that meat counter, and that is the butcher. Without them, it may as well be a pre-packed meat aisle, and there is so much more that they can offer. From the research, we know that 76% of consumers like the personalisation that comes with butchers preparing their red meat for them. 3/4 feel comfortable engaging with someone at the counter, and more than half like that they can speak with someone at the counter about their purchases. Now, this shows that the human element is really important to shoppers, and they still really value these personal touches. If we look at the specific types of things which they are looking for in their interactions or conversations with the butcher, it shows that there is an expectation of a certain level of knowledge. Now, some of this can be as simple as what offers are on at the moment, or how much certain cuts or weights would work out at in price, through to information about what the butcher can offer around sourcing of meat, for example being British or the local farm it might have come from, or the seasonality of certain cuts, such as when's the best time for new season lamb, or what cuts are good for certain dishes at different times of year. By offering this level of information to shoppers, it can help get their confidence that the butcher knows what they're talking about, and they will value the interaction more. So let's refresh ourselves on that hierarchy of the messages that we need to be looking at and the formats which it needs to take. So from afar, inspiration is the best way to attract attention. On the approach to the counter, having health, farming and provenance messages offer reassurance. And finally, at the counter, showcasing awards, local information, specific vitamins and mineral messaging in combination has the highest influence on purchase intent. So what does this look like? Having eye-catching dishes on posters, providing tasty looking recipe cards and reassuring information in leaflets, then having meat flags in the counter to offer that final nudge to encourage purchase by showcasing the tangible health messages, cooking guidelines and Britishness. Which brings us back to what I showed you at the start, that the ideal counter could look like for increasing purchase intent. If you are interested in finding out any more about this research or any of the work which we do, please feel free to be in contact with the Retail and Consumer Insights team via the website, or sign up to our newsletter to have the latest insights delivered straight to your inbox. Thanks so much for your time.